In this video, I'll be showing you how I prepare my tipless piping bag to make these adorable leaves on this carrot cookie without having to use a piping tip. I start by cutting off a tiny bit off the tip of the bag so that I can release the air. This allows me to press the icing down to the end where I can see better when I'm getting ready to make my cut. I prefer to use a small pair of sewing scissors to do this job because I find it easier to cut the small bits off of the bag that I need in order to make smaller leaves. Here you'll see me being super sure that my seam is lined right down the center, because if it's not, it'll cause the leaves to be irregular on each side. Now you'll see I'm cutting off a tiny small little bit. Notice how I'm cutting off just a tiny little bit off of each side because I like to take this process slow and test it until I get the size I want. I'll be needing this icing for small leaves and larger leaves. And here I can tell that I did not get my cut very straight, but I want to show you what happens when you don't get the cut straight. You'll notice here that the icing's only coming out of one side because I didn't even cut all the way down to the seam on the right side of the bag. So I'm going to take my time and try again. I don't get in a hurry with this, and there's probably a lot better, easier ways to do this, but this is just the way I do it, and I just keep trying until I get it even and the leaves start looking good. You'll notice that tiny little bit that I cut off. You want to do this very slow until you get the size leaves that you want. Now I have both sides cut, but I'm not really liking the shape of the leaf that's coming out. So I'm going to give it another tiny little trim. I'm going to smash the bag down so I can get it nice and flat and be sure that my seam is even. And then I'm going to take my scissors and trim off just a tiny little bit off of the right side of the bag. See how tiny that is? We're not cutting off very much. Now I'm happy with that. I think that's looking good. Now, in order to make the leaves, all you have to do is press down and then pull back and go back and forth with the bag. Here, I'm making tiny little leaves to make sure that I've cut it the right size because I'll be needing those tiny little leaves for some other cookies I'm making. This is a very stiff consistency icing, and it's about as thick and stiff as the icing that I used for my royal icing roses if you saw the tutorial that I made last week. Here I'm just playing around and keeping in mind what other cookies I'll be decorating and being sure that this bag is cut properly and that the leaves are going to flow out and make a good shape for me. It's very simple. If you want the leaf wider, you can just press more firmly on the bag before you start to pull back and just play around with it and practice with it. For years, I struggled with making royal icing leaves with the piping tip, and I was so excited when I learned this trick or technique or whatever you'd like to call it. Now that I've got my leaves together, I'm going to start decorating my carrot cookie. I have made a template that I've traced onto the cookie with edible marker. And I like the look of this cookie when I do it in separate sections. But because I made my icing a few days ago and I couldn't get around to making my cookies yet, my icing had been sitting and I didn't really like the consistency of it. So it was kind of giving me a struggle to get these lines piped out. So I decided to let them crust over in between so that I made sure that there would be a nice separation in between each section of the carrot. I really find it very helpful to make templates for my cookies. And the way I do that is that I trace the cookie onto cardstock paper, and then I just take a pencil and start sketching out what I think I might like for my cookie. When I find what I like, I'll cut it out, and then I will create like a stencil for myself that I can use over and over again. I actually used this design last year, and I loved it so much I decided to use it again this year. So I saved the template and I didn't have to do any of the work. I just baked the cookie, traced the lines on, and I already had my design ready to go without having to pull out my projector or any of that business. I love using my projector, but if I can get away without having to pull it out, that makes me even happier. And I feel like it really saves me a lot of time and it allows me to be more creative with my cookies. Now I'll be flooding every other section of the cookie because I don't want to risk the icing touching each other. I'm using the same icing consistency that I outlined the cookie with, but I have it in a bag with a larger hole in the end so that the icing will come out more quickly. No, I know y'all got your eyes on this cute little scribe, and it came from my friend Heather at One Smart Cookies and Crafts. And I am in love with this little ballerina bunny. It's so sweet, and she sent it to me as a gift because so many of my followers had went to her Etsy store and purchased her scribes and her stencils. So she sent it to me as a thank you, and it was so special and sweet of her. Now, y'all know I'm new to this long form content thing, and I'm not sure how much of this you want to watch in real time. I'm so used to speeding up my videos so that I can fit them in 60 seconds for a reel. And when I watch these videos back in real time, I feel like it's very slow and it takes forever to get through the video. But I also understand that a lot of beginners need to see this process to understand what decorators are doing and how they get the icing smooth. This is how you get your icing smooth. First, you take the icing and push it into the areas that it needs to go with your scribe. And then if you just give it a little wiggle and move it around, eventually the icing will settle down. It'll often leave little peaks when you pull away your scribe, and you'll need to tap those down and just kind of wiggle it around until the icing heals and it smooths over. Sometimes you'll need to shake the cookie, but I was able to smooth this out without having to shake the cookie. I have allowed those sections to crust over enough that I know the icing won't heal and blend together. That's important if you want to get a raised and puffy look. As you can see on the parts that have dried, it's trying to crater a little bit, but I think that's because my icing just wasn't mixed well enough. And like I said, I colored it and prepared it a few days ago, and I just hadn't got around to using it yet. So I don't think I did a good job of mixing the icing, and that can cause a lot of problems. Now I'm making my way down to the last two sections, and then I'm going to allow this cookie to dry pretty good, not all the way through, but I'm going to allow it to crust over pretty well because when I'm moving it around to put my leaves on, I don't want to shift it because when you do that, you can cause your icing to crack, and it doesn't look very good when you have a big crack running down the center. It's bad enough you have to deal with the craters, but when you add the cracks too, it's just all a mess. We're almost there, and then I'll get to show you the best part where I put the leaves. And not only am I going to show you how I put the leaves, I'm also going to show you how I do this technique that I came up with last year to save me some time and give me a little bit of accent and coloration on the outside of the cookie without having to pull out my airbrush. I don't enjoy airbrushing, and I will avoid it at all costs. I think it's messy, and I just think it's too much to pull out and get going. And I love the way it looks. So I found a little cheat that I'm going to share with you towards the end of this video. Now I'm going to let this sit to the side and crust over pretty good so I don't have to worry about it. And watch, I'm going to get a little air bubble over here that tried to sneak away. But if I leave that air bubble there and I don't pop it, it's going to pop on its own. And then I'm going to have a hole in my icing. There it is. So I'm just going to pop the bubble and then wiggle it around and settle the icing around that area again. And then I'm going to add a little more icing because it wasn't quite puffy enough for me. It was looking a little flat. So I just add a little more on top, wiggle it around, and make it settle in. Now for the fun part. So now you see I have my icing bag cut like I showed you in the beginning of this video. And I'm just rocking the icing bag back and forth, giving it an even pressure as I pull away from the center of the cookie and out to the edges. I love this technique. I get so excited every time I get to do leaves, and especially on palm trees, because you can cut the bag larger and make big leaves for palm trees. And I think it just gives an incredible effect to the cookie. It's so impressive, and people are always so excited when they see it in real life and in my reels. Look at that. It's just so amazing. And because the icing is so thick, it holds its shape, and you can even pipe leaves on top of other leaves and they won't melt and blend together. So here I'm going to put one last little leaf to fill in that area. And then this is another thing I like to do with this bag. Instead of holding it flat for the leaf, I turn it up on its side and it gives me like a high stem, if you will. And it looks different than if you were to just pipe it with the piping bag. I'm going to smooth those little tips down on the edge. Make sure they look connected to the cookie. And there we go. Isn't she so cute? Now, this is the little highlight technique that I like. It kind of ages the cookie or gives it like a vintage look or something, I think. So I just take an edible marker and I just kind of trace around the edges. I don't try to be neat about it. I just try to be kind of sloppy and irregular. And then I take a slightly dampened paintbrush. I just stick it in water, just a little bit of water, and then dab it off on a paper towel. And then I just kind of rub the color around and spread it a little bit. I don't know, this is kind of a weird technique, but I love it. And it's so easy. It's so much faster, not faster. It's so much faster than having to get out an airbrush gun and all the paints and all that, make all that mess. So here you'll see I'm just brushing around on the edges a little bit. I probably shouldn't have used a paintbrush this large because I get it on the cookie and that really annoys me. So a smaller paintbrush is better, but that's the one that was closest to me, so I went with it. So now I want to give a little bit of highlight to the rest of the cookie, but I don't want to really take the risk of drawing on it with the marker because it may not be completely dry. So what I do is I scribble a little bit of marker onto something plastic, and then I dip my brush in that and in a little bit of water, and then I just kind of use it to paint on the cookie, kind of like watercolor, I guess. Now the icing is going to break down a little bit because I'm adding water to the surface of the icing, but a carrot is not smooth anyway, so I like that texture, and I'm actually intentionally digging the brush in just a little bit with the water so that I can get a nice texture on the surface and spread out all of the colors. Now you can start to see how it's given it like just a little bit of accent and color to it so it's not so orange and plain. I really love the finished look of this cookie, and I really hope that these techniques helped you and that you will give them a try. I really appreciate you watching, and if you enjoyed my video, please give it a like. Thanks for watching.